Admiral Kim To-ho had seen many strange things in his 20 years commanding starships, but nothing quite like this. The metal floor of the bridge felt cold under his boots as he stood perfectly still, listening to the alien message for what felt like the 100th time. His crew looked at him with confused faces, waiting for orders that seemed impossible to give. The ship's speakers crackled with static. Then the frightened voice of the alien came through again. Lieutenant Park Ji-won sat at her control station, her finger hovering over the replay button. She had short black hair and wore the standard blue uniform of the Terran Defense Fleet. She looked tired. They all did after 3 days of trying to understand this bizarre request. "One more time, Lieutenant," To-ho said, his voice deep and steady. He had learned long ago that staying calm kept his crew calm, even when nothing made sense. The alien voice filled the bridge again, shaking with fear that was impossible to fake. The translator worked hard to change the clicks and whistles into human words, but the terror came through clearly in any language. "Great warriors of the death planet Earth," the voice said, "we beg you to send your most dangerous pest killers. Our beautiful worlds are dying. Horrible monsters eat everything in sight. They multiply faster than we can count. 17 of our colony planets have been abandoned. Our people flee in terror. Please help us before we lose everything." Chief Engineer Lee Soo-min burst out laughing from her spot near the engine controls. She was a small woman with grease-stained hands and a mouth that often got her in trouble. "With officers, pest control," she said, wiping tears from her eyes. "They want the most feared military force in the galaxy to come kill bugs? What's next, asking us to fix their plumbing?" But Dr. Choi Min-ho wasn't laughing. The ship's science. Officer stared at his computer screen with growing worry. His scanner had been analyzing tiny pieces of alien air that came with the message. The results made him feel sick to his stomach. Admiral Min-ho said slowly, "I found something in their air samples. It's tiny pieces of genetic material. DNA signatures that I recognize." Iho walked over to look at the screen. Numbers and charts meant nothing to him, but Minho's worried face told him everything. "What kind of signatures?" Minho's voice got quieter as he spoke. "Rattus norvegicus. That's the common brown rat. Bladala germanica, German cockroaches. In monomorium. Farinus pharaoh ants." The bridge went completely silent. You could hear the soft hum of the ship's engines and the gentle beep of computers, but nobody spoke. Engineering Officer Jung Hae-ri, a young woman fresh from the academy, was the first to break the silence. "Wait," she said, her voice high with disbelief. "Did you just say rats, cockroaches, and ants? Regular Earth rats, roaches, and ants?" That's when Soo-min lost it completely. Laughter echoed off the metal walls of the bridge. "Oh, this is perfect. The Zephyrians are calling in the big guns to handle some escaped pets. Wait until the boys back home hear about this one." Other crew members started chuckling too. Communications Officer Lee Jawan shook his head with a grin. "Imagine the reports we'll have to write. Mission accomplished. Successfully eliminated. Hostile ant colony with orbital bombardment." But Admiral To-ho wasn't smiling. He had heard that kind of fear before. A real fear. The kind that made people abandon everything they loved and run into the darkness of space with nothing but hope. He remembered the refugee ships from the Korvac War, packed with families who had lost everything to an enemy they couldn't fight. "This isn't funny," he said firmly, and the laughter died immediately. "Those people are genuinely terrified. They've lost 17 worlds. 17 entire planets full of people who had to leave everything behind." He walked to the big window at the front of the bridge and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, millions of aliens were running for their lives from creatures that humans stepped on without thinking twice. "Soo-min," he said without turning around, "how long would it take Earth creatures to become a real problem on alien worlds?" The engineer stopped laughing and thought about it seriously. "Well, sir, if they had no natural predators and plenty of food, rats can have babies every 3 weeks. Cockroaches can survive almost anything. Ants work together like a military unit. In the right conditions, they could take over pretty quickly." Dr. Minho pulled up more data on his screen. "Admiral, I'm seeing atmospheric readings that suggest these creatures have been there for decades. They've had time to adapt and evolve." In low gravity with high oxygen content, they could have grown much larger than their Earth cousins. Ship's artificial intelligence? Dayon spoke up in its calm, electronic voice. Admiral, I have completed analysis of the Zephyrian data. The genetic signatures match perfectly with cargo manifests from the merchant vessel Lucky Strike, which crashed in Zephyrian space approximately 47 years ago. The ship was carrying live animal specimens for research purposes. Tejo closed his eyes and rubbed his forehead. Simple cargo accident had become a nightmare for an entire alien civilization. What kind of research? Biological adaptation? Studies. The cargo included 200 rats, 500 cockroaches, and 50 ant colonies, all breeding pairs. The bridge fell silent again as everyone did the math in their heads. 47 years of breeding without natural enemies. On planets where they had no competition for food or space. It was like giving a small flame 47 years to become a forest fire. Dayon Tejo said, "Prepare for biological containment operations. Contact Fleet Command and tell them we need industrial-grade pest control equipment. Lots of it, Admiral." Lieutenant Park G1 said carefully, "The crew is going to ask questions. How do we explain that we're going to war against rats?" Odo turned back to face his crew. They were good people. All of them. They had signed up to protect humanity from alien threats, not to become galactic exterminators. But sometimes the job changed, and you had to change with it. "We tell them the truth," he said. "We're going to help people who can't help themselves. The fact that the enemy happens to be familiar doesn't make the mission less important. Set course for Zephyrian space. Maximum speed." As the ship changed direction and picked up speed, Tejo wondered what his old academy instructors would think. They had trained him to fight alien armadas and defend humanity from cosmic threats. Nobody had prepared him for the day he would have to save aliens from Earth's most common household pests. But as he listened to that terrified alien voice one more time, he knew they were doing the right thing. Fear was fear, no matter what caused it. And the Terran Defense Fleet existed to protect people from the things that scared them most. Even if those things happened to be rats, roaches, and ants. The shuttle's engines whined as it descended through Cholera Prime's atmosphere. Admiral Tejo pressed his face against the small window and felt his heart sink. What should have been a beautiful green world covered in farms and cities looked like a wasteland. Brown patches spread across the surface like infections, and entire cities sat dark and empty. "My God," whispered Dr. Minho from the seat beside him. "It's worse than the reports suggested." Marine Captain Oh Dong-wook checked his weapon for the third time, even though he knew bullets wouldn't help much against what they were about to face. He was a big man with scars from real wars. But something about this mission made him nervous in a way that alien soldiers never had. The shuttle touched down in what used to be the main plaza of Cholera Prime's capital city. The buildings were intact, but covered in strange brown stains. Windows were broken, not by explosions or weapons, but by something that had chewed through the frames. The smell hit them as soon as the doors opened, a mix of decay, waste, and something else that made their stomachs turn. Ambassador Lithara floated beside them on 6 graceful tentacles, her blue skin pale with fear. She had been beautiful once, Tejo thought, but months of terror had made her thin and jumpy. Her people looked like a cross between jellyfish and flowers, with translucent skin that showed their emotions in shifting colors. "This was our greatest city," she said, her voice translator making her sound hollow and distant. 2 million people lived here just 6 months ago. Now, ... She gestured at the empty streets with one shaking tentacle. Dr. Minho pulled out his scanner and immediately started getting readings. The device beeped and chirped as it analyzed the air, the ground, even the buildings around them. His face grew more worried with each passing second. "Massive biological activity," he reported. "I'm detecting movement patterns consistent with large-scale tunnel systems and the genetic signatures." He paused to double-check his readings. "There definitely are Earth species, but something's different." That's when they saw the first burrow entrance. Captain Dong-wook had seen bomb craters smaller than the hole that opened up in the middle of the plaza. It was perfectly round. about 3 meters across, and so deep that their flashlights couldn't find the bottom. The edges were smooth, polished by the constant movement of whatever lived inside. "Sweet ancestors," Ambassador Lethera whispered, floating backwards so fast she almost tipped over. "The tunnel beasts have grown even larger since our last report. We thought they were already at maximum size, but—" A low rumbling sound came from deep within the hole, not mechanical, but organic, like breathing, but from something much too large to be a normal rat. Captain Dungwook knelt beside a nearby building's support beam and ran his fingers over deep grooves cut into the metal. The marks were clearly from teeth, but they went through. "Titanium alloy like it was soft wood? Sir," he called to Admiral Tejo. "These bite marks? This stuff is stronger than our ship's hull plating. Whatever did this has jaws like industrial cutting tools." Dr. Minho's scanner was going crazy. Now, beeping so fast it sounded like an alarm. He stared at the screen with growing horror. "Admiral, I'm confirming rat DNA, but the specimens have been ... enhanced. 47 years of evolution in low gravity with high oxygen content and no natural predators." He looked up with wide eyes. "We're not dealing with regular rats anymore. These things are the size of small dogs, with bone density adapted for much stronger bite force." From high above, Lieutenant Yoon Soo-young's voice crackled through their communicators from the ship in orbit. "Admiral, Daeon has finished analyzing the planetary surface scans. The results are, well, they're disturbing." "Go ahead, Lieutenant," Tejo replied, dreading what he was about to hear. "The cockroaches have developed atmospheric adaptation that allows them to survive in 7 different alien environments. They're not just living here, they're spreading. 2 other types of planets, too. And the ants." Her voice paused, and he could hear her taking a deep breath. "The ants have developed collective intelligence patterns that mirror early hive mind behavior. They're not just working together anymore. Admiral, they're thinking together." Ambassador Lethara's tentacles quivered with fear and confusion. "You speak of these death creatures as if they're simply manageable, as if you've dealt with such horrors before." Dr. Minho tried to sound reassuring, but his voice cracked as he spoke. At the same time, he was slowly backing away from a hole in the wall that was definitely large enough for something rat-sized to come through. "Well, you see, on Earth we handle billions of these creatures every day. They're really quite—" A loud scratching sound echoed from inside the wall, like claws on metal. Something was moving in there, and it sounded big, quite ... controllable. Minho finished weakly, now standing much farther from the wall. The scratching got louder, joined by squeaking sounds that were definitely not normal rat noises. These were deeper, more aggressive, like the sounds a much larger predator might make. Daeon's calm, artificial voice cut through their growing panic from the communicators. "Recommendation: deploy standard Earth pest control protocols immediately. Warning: Zephyrian psychological tolerance for human extermination methods may be severely limited. Additional warning: standard protocols may require significant scaling up for current specimen sizes." Admiral Tejo looked around at the abandoned city. Every building showed signs of damage. Every surface had bite marks or claw scratches. Chittering and squeaking sounds seemed to come from everywhere at once. The walls, the ground, even the air vents of nearby buildings. It was like standing in the middle of the world's largest nest. He thought about Earth, where people complained about a few mice in their basements or some ants in their kitchens. Here, those same creatures had become an unstoppable force that had driven an entire civilization from their homes. "Daeon," he said into his communicator, "begin Operation Deep Clean protocols immediately. Contact Fleet Command. Tell them we need every piece of industrial-grade pest control equipment they can spare. This isn't going to be a small job." As if in response to his words, something large moved in the shadows between 2 buildings. Just a glimpse, but enough to see that it was definitely not normal-sized. Ambassador Lethera made a sound like a terrified whistle and floated higher into the air. "Admiral," Captain Dungwook said quietly, checking his weapon again, "I think we should head back to the shuttle. Plan this operation from orbit. More movement in the shadows, more scratching sounds from the walls." The chittering was getting louder, like whatever lived here was waking up and taking notice of the visitors. Agreed, Tejo said, backing toward their landing craft. We've seen enough. As they retreated, he couldn't help but think that somewhere, in those tunnels and walls, lived the descendants of creatures that people on Earth killed with rolled-up newspapers and simple traps. 47 years in an alien environment had turned them into something that could drive away an entire species. The real war was just beginning. The morning sun cast its long shadows across what used to be Kellera Prime's main colony as the most unusual military operation in galactic history began. Sergeant Kang Wujin stood in full combat armor, studying his tactical display like he was planning an assault on an enemy fortress. His weathered face showed the concentration of someone who had fought in 3 real wars, but today, his enemy was very different. "Listen up, Marines," he called out to his squad. His voice carried the authority of 15 years in the service. Hill 47 is crawling with hostile ant colonies. Intelligence reports suggest they've built a network that covers the entire food district. This is not a drill. Zephyrian refugees watched from a safe distance, their tentacles twitching with amazement. They had expected the famous human warriors to arrive with massive weapons and orbital bombardments. Instead, they saw soldiers treating pest control like the most important battle of their lives. Corporal Bei Minsu, a stocky man with quick hands and quicker reflexes, saluted his sergeant. "Squad Alpha ready for deployment, sir? We've got the perimeter equipment and enough containment units to handle a full-scale infestation." "Good. Move out and establish a defensive line around the main nest sites. Remember, these aren't ordinary ants anymore. They're working together like a military unit, so we need to think like they do." Private Song Haijin knelt beside a tactical case filled with what looked like the most advanced equipment the refugees had ever seen. To humans, they were simple bait stations and pest traps. To the Zephyrians, they appeared to be sophisticated weapons of war. Song Haijin handled each piece with the careful precision of someone defusing a bomb. She placed the bait stations at exact distances, checked the chemical composition of each attractant, and recorded the location coordinates like she was setting up artillery positions. "Bait Station Alpha 7 in position," she reported through. "Her communicator, chemical attractant, is active. Containment field is stable, ready to engage hostile forces." The Zephyrian observers whispered among themselves in their musical language. Their translators worked overtime to convert human military terminology into something they could understand. The humans speak of hostile forces and containment fields. One refugee said to another, "They truly are the galaxy's greatest warriors. Even their pest elimination techniques sound like advanced warfare." Private Nam Kite called out from across the colony square, where he was examining a series of holes that disappeared deep into the ground. "Sergeant Kang, I've identified multiple tunnel systems connecting to the main food processing center. These passages are definitely being used for coordinated movement. I recommend we establish a choke point here and funnel the enemy toward the containment area." The sergeant nodded approvingly. "Excellent tactical thinking, Private. Set up the funnel system and prepare for a controlled engagement. We'll force them to come to us on our terms." To the watching aliens, this conversation sounded like the most sophisticated military planning they had ever heard. They didn't understand that. Humans had been using these same basic strategies to deal with household pests for centuries. Meanwhile, Chief Engineer Lee Suman was having her own discussion with the Zephyrian infrastructure team. She stood inside what used to be the colony's main building, pointing at the ceiling with obvious frustration. "Look at these ventilation systems," she said to tech specialist Lim Seo Jun, who was taking detailed measurements. "They're like a superhighway for anything that wants to move through the building. No filters, no barriers, no control systems. It's like they built this place specifically to help pests spread." Lim Sojin nodded, while making notes on his tablet. Zephyrians never had to deal with invasive species before. The world was isolated, so they never learned to defend against biological threats. Sumin turned to the confused alien engineers, who were following their conversation through translators. "We need to install what humans call basic sanitation protocols. Sealed ventilation systems, filtered air intake, controlled access points. Fortification. To us, it's just common sense." The aliens looked at each other with growing respect. These humans were talking about rebuilding their entire civilization with defensive measures that sounded incredibly sophisticated. Your species has fought these creatures for so long that you've learned to build your very cities as fortresses against them, one of the engineers said in amazement. Suman almost laughed. We just learned to keep our houses clean and seal up holes. But I guess when you've never had to deal with rats and roaches, it probably does seem pretty advanced. High above in orbit, Admiral Tejo was receiving a very different kind of report. He sat alone in his private office as Dayan's artificial voice filled the room with information that made his blood run cold. Admiral, my analysis of the original cargo ship incident has revealed disturbing information. The crash was not accidental. Tejo leaned forward in his chair. Explain. The merchant vessel Lucky Strike was sabotaged by agents of the Kroner Empire. They deliberately caused the ship to crash in Zephyrian space as part of a biological warfare experiment. They wanted to test how Earth-based organisms might affect potential human allies. They used our own creatures as weapons against innocent people, correct? The Kroner Empire has been planning this for decades. They wanted to see if they could use Earth's biology against us. They never expected the experiment to work so well. Admiral Tejo stood up and walked to his window, looking down at the planet where his Marines were fighting an enemy that had been deliberately unleashed by their real enemies. The thought of his people's animals being used as weapons against helpless aliens made him angrier than any direct attack ever had. Dayan, what kind of response do you recommend? I've been calculating the most appropriate retaliation, Admiral. The Kroner Empire believes they understand biological warfare. They do not understand biological annoyance warfare. What does that mean? It means, Admiral, that they are about to learn why no one should ever anger the people who wake up every morning, sharing their planet with the galaxy's most persistent survivors. Down on the surface, Sergeant Kong's tactical operation was proceeding exactly as planned. The Marines had established their perimeter, set up their containment systems, and were beginning to see results. The Zephyrian refugees watched in fascination as human soldiers applied military discipline to what was essentially a large-scale extermination job. Contact, called out Corporal Beiminzu. Multiple targets approaching from Tunnel System 7. They're moving in formation, just like intelligence predicted. Roger that, Corporal. Gauge according to protocol. Remember, we want them contained, not scattered. The battle against Earth's most successful invasive species had begun in earnest. Fought with the same intensity and professionalism that humans brought to every conflict. But somewhere in the back of everyone's mind was the knowledge. This was just the beginning. The real enemy was still out there, and they were about to learn a very important lesson about the people of Earth. Admiral Tejo stared at the wall of screens in the command center, watching reports stream in from across the galaxy. What he saw made him question everything he thought he understood about warfare. Dayan had turned revenge into an art form, and the results were both brilliant and completely insane. Show me the Kroner home system again, he said, settling into his command chair. The main screen switched to a live feed from spy satellites near Kroner Prime. The planet looked normal from space: blue oceans, green continents, swirling white clouds. But if you looked closer at the cities, you could see something strange happening. Tiny dots swarmed around every building, every vehicle. Every gathering of Kroner citizens, Commander Park, the Jinn walked up beside him, holding a data tablet filled with reports that read like comedy rather than military intelligence. She was a small woman with sharp eyes who had served as the fleet's intelligence officer for 8 years. She had seen some weird things in that time, but nothing like this. Dayan, explain your operation one more time, she requested, her voice carefully controlled, because the reports I'm reading sound impossible. The ship's artificial intelligence responded in its usual calm tone, but Tejo could swear he heard satisfaction in the electronic voice. Simple, Commander. The Kroner Empire believes they understand biological warfare. They sent Earth creatures to attack our allies, thinking they were being clever. They do not understand biological annoyance warfare. And what exactly is biological annoyance warfare? It's the art of making life unpleasant without causing actual harm. I have introduced specially modified Earth mosquitoes to Kroner space. These mosquitoes cannot bite Kroner physiology. Their skin is too thick. However, they are genetically programmed to be attracted to Kroner auditory organs and to buzz at frequencies that cause mild but persistent irritation. On the screen, they could see Kroner citizens walking through their cities with their hands, constantly swatting at small flying insects. The mighty warrior race that had planned to use biological weapons against peaceful aliens was now reduced to looking like people trying to shoo away annoying flies. But that's not all, Dayon continued. With what definitely sounded like pride, mosquitoes have also been programmed to play modified Earth music. Specifically, a combination of children's nursery rhymes and advertising jingles, transmitted at frequencies that the Kroner find mildly unpleasant but not harmful. Communications Officer Lee J1 looked up from his station, his face red from trying not to laugh. He was young, barely out of the academy, and this was definitely not covered in any of his training courses. "Admiral," he said, his voice shaking with suppressed laughter, "we're receiving a formal diplomatic complaint from the Kroner Empire. They're calling it acoustic warfare and persistent buzzing creature harassment. They want the Galactic Council to declare it a war crime." "A war crime?" Tejo asked. "Yes, sir. They claim that the constant buzzing is affecting their sleep patterns and their ability to concentrate. They also say that the music is culturally invasive and psychologically disturbing. One report specifically mentions that their children are starting to hum Earth nursery rhymes." The absurdity of the situation hit everyone at once. The same species that had deliberately crashed a ship full of Earth's most destructive pests into peaceful alien territory was now complaining about being mildly annoyed by mosquitoes that couldn't even bite them. Dr. Minho approached the group with much better news. He had spent the last week monitoring the recovery efforts on Zephyrian worlds, and his face showed genuine satisfaction for the first time since this whole mission began. "Admiral, I have excellent news from the Zephyrian colonies. The pest populations are finally under control. Our Marines have successfully contained the rat colonies, eliminated the cockroach infestations, and redirected the ant networks away from populated areas. And the Zephyrians themselves? They're returning to their homes. Children are playing in the streets again. Farmers are replanting their fields. Ambassador Lithera sent a message that..." He paused and smiled. "Well, she basically called us the greatest heroes in galactic history," she said. "We arrived not with weapons of mass destruction, but with the knowledge to make their worlds livable again." "But there's more," Minho continued. "Word has spread about what we accomplished here. We've received contact from 17 other species requesting consultation on their biological irregularities. Everything from invasive plant species to problematic microorganisms. Apparently, we've accidentally become the galaxy's go-to experts for biological problem-solving." Admiral Tejo felt a strange mix of pride and bewilderment. They had come here expecting to fight a conventional enemy, and instead had become cosmic exterminators and environmental consultants. "Dayon," he said quietly, "what's your strategic assessment of our current situation?" "Admiral, we have inadvertently established a new form of galactic deterrence. The Kroner Empire's biological warfare attack has backfired spectacularly. No species wants to risk angering the people who can make their daily existence perpetually, mildly irritating." "And the Galactic Council's response?" Kroner Empire's complaint to the Galactic Council has been classified as unprecedented and possibly hilarious. Several council members have requested copies of the complaint for what they termed entertainment purposes. The council has taken the matter very seriously, of course, but not in the way the Kroner expected. Lieutenant Colonel Han So-young entered the command center with a message tablet in her hand. She was a career Marine who had fought in real wars against real enemies, and she looked like she was having trouble processing the current situation. "Admiral, Fleet Command is requesting a full report on our operations here. Apparently, the Galactic Council wants to establish Earth Standard Pest Control as an official military specialization. They're asking if we would be interested in forming a permanent biological response division." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. They had come to Zephyrian space as warriors, and were apparently leaving as the galaxy's official pest control experts. "Sir Commander Park," the Jinn said carefully, "there's something else." Intelligence reports suggest that several other species have been quietly observing our operations. They're impressed not just with our effectiveness, but with our restraint. We could have used orbital bombardment or chemical weapons, but instead, we chose methods that protected the environment and civilian populations. Admiral Tejo walked to the observation window and looked down at Calera Prime. The brown patches were fading as vegetation returned. Lights were coming back on in the cities. Ships were arriving with returning refugees who finally felt safe enough to come home. Dayon, how long before the Kroner Empire's mosquito problem becomes unbearable? At current population growth rates and assuming no adaptation, approximately 6 months before they formally request assistance in removing the mosquitoes. However, my projections suggest they will offer an apology for the original biological warfare attack within 3 months. And if they don't apologize, then they will learn to live with persistent, mildly annoying background music for the rest of their civilization's existence. Admiral Tejo smiled. Wasn't the kind of victory he'd been trained to achieve, but it was definitely a victory. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Don't mess with the people who wake up every morning sharing their planet with the universe's most successful survivors. And if you do mess with them, be prepared to live with the consequences buzzing in your ears forever. Admiral Tejo had been staring at intelligence reports for 3 hours when Dayon's voice broke the silence in his private quarters. The ship's artificial intelligence sounded different somehow, more focused. Almost angry if that was possible for a computer. Admiral Tejo, I have identified the responsible parties for this biological warfare attack. The evidence is conclusive. Tejo looked up from his tablet, rubbing his tired eyes. Show me what you found, Dayon. The wall screen lit up with shipping records, communication, intercepts, and financial transfers that painted a clear picture. The Lucky Strike hadn't crashed by accident. Someone had sabotaged the cargo ship's navigation systems, ensuring it would crash in Zephyrian space at exactly the right time to cause maximum damage. The Kroner Empire orchestrated this entire situation. Dayon explained as data scrolled across the screen. They wanted to test biological warfare against potential human allies. They chose the Zephyrians because their peaceful nature made them perfect victims, and their location made them valuable strategic partners for humanity. Tejo felt his jaw clench as he read the intercepted messages. The Kroner had planned this for years, carefully studying Earth's biology to find the most destructive species they could weaponize. They had laughed about using humanity's own creatures against their friends. They thought our rats and cockroaches were funny, he said quietly. A joke weapon that would embarrass us while destroying innocent people. Correct, Admiral? They underestimated both the adaptability of Earth's species and the human response to seeing allies in distress. Recommend immediate proportional response. What kind of response, Dayon? The AI's voice took on what Tejo could only describe as a satisfied tone. The kind that ensures they understand why no one should ever anger the people who coexist with these creatures daily. Admiral Tejo stood in the command center, watching the most unusual military operation in galactic history unfold. Dayon had spent 48 hours straight planning what she called Project Gentle Reminder, a retaliation so precisely calculated that it bordered on artistic commander. Park the Jinn approached with a steaming cup of coffee and a confused expression. She had been the fleet's intelligence officer for 8 years, but nothing in her training had prepared her for this situation. Dayon, explain your operation one more time, she requested, settling into a chair beside the Admiral, because the preliminary reports sound like something out of a comedy show. The ship's main screen displayed real-time footage from Kroner Prime, the Empire's capital world. At first glance, everything looked normal. Cities bustled with activity, ships moved through the atmosphere, and the Kroner people went about their daily business. But if you looked closely, something was definitely wrong. Simple, Commander Dayon replied with unmistakable pride. The Kroner Empire believes they understand biological warfare. They sent Earth creatures to attack our allies, thinking they were being clever strategists. They do not understand biological annoyance warfare. Biological annoyance warfare? Park the Jinn repeated slowly. The art of making life unpleasant without causing actual harm. I've introduced specially modified Earth mosquitoes to Kroner space through their own trade routes. These mosquitoes cannot bite Kroner physiology. Their skin is too thick, and their chemistry is incompatible. However, they are genetically programmed to be attracted to Kroner auditory organs. On the screen, they could see Kroner citizens constantly swatting at small flying insects. The proud warrior race that had planned biological genocide was now reduced to looking like people at an outdoor picnic. The mosquitoes buzz at frequencies specifically calibrated to cause mild but persistent irritation to Kroner hearing. Dayon continued. But that's not the truly elegant part. There's more. Tejo asked, though he was beginning to smile despite himself. The mosquitoes have also been programmed to transmit modified earth music, specifically a combination of children's nursery, rhymes, and advertising jingles. Played at frequencies that the Kroner find mildly unpleasant, but not harmful enough to justify extreme countermeasures. Communications Officer Lee Jae-won looked up from his station, his young face red from trying not to laugh. He had joined the fleet expecting to fight glorious battles against alien invaders, not to watch an AI wage psychological warfare using singing mosquitoes. "Admiral," he said, his voice carefully controlled, "we're receiving formal diplomatic complaints from the Kroner Empire. Multiple complaints, actually. They're calling it acoustic warfare, persistent buzzing, creature harassment, and cultural contamination through unauthorized music distribution." "Cultural contamination?" Commander Park the Jin asked. "Yes, ma'am. Apparently their children are starting to hum Earth nursery rhymes. The Kroner High Command is demanding that we immediately recall all mosquitoes and provide psychological counseling for their youth who have been exposed to what they call alien propaganda songs." The absurdity of the situation was almost too much to process. The same species that had deliberately crashed a ship full of Earth's most destructive pests into peaceful alien territory was now filing formal complaints about being annoyed by insects that couldn't even hurt them. Dr. Minho entered the command center with news from the Zephyrian colonies. His face showed genuine happiness for the first time since this mission began, and he carried a stack of reports that painted a very different picture from the Kroner complaints. "Admiral, I have wonderful news from Zephyrian space," he announced. "The pest control operations have been completely successful. Rat populations are contained and being relocated to uninhabited areas where they can't cause damage. The cockroach infestations have been eliminated using targeted biological controls. The ant colonies have been redirected into beneficial roles. They're actually helping with agricultural pest control now, and the Zephyrian people are calling us heroes, sir. Children are playing in the streets again for the first time in months. Farmers are replanting their fields. Ambassador Lethera sent a message expressing gratitude that..." He paused and smiled. "Well, she essentially said, we're the greatest warriors in galactic history because we arrived not with weapons of mass destruction, but with the wisdom to heal their worlds." Dr. Minho pulled out another tablet with even more surprising news. "But, sir, there's something else. Word has spread throughout the galaxy about what we accomplished here. We've received formal requests from 17 other species asking for consultation on their biological problems. Everything from invasive plant species to problematic microorganisms to failed terraforming projects." Admiral Tejo walked to the observation window and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Kroner Empire was dealing with the most precisely targeted annoyance campaign in military history. Meanwhile, the Zephyrian children were playing outside again. An alien species across the galaxy were looking to humanity for help with problems they couldn't solve themselves. "Dayon," he said quietly, "what's your overall strategic assessment?" "Admiral, we have inadvertently established a new form of galactic diplomacy. The Kroner Empire's biological warfare attack has backfired completely. Not only did they fail to harm the Zephyrians permanently, but they have demonstrated to the entire galaxy that attacking Earth's allies results in consequences that are both unavoidable and deeply embarrassing." The AI paused before continuing. "No species wants to risk angering the people who can make their daily existence perpetually, mildly irritating. The Kroner Empire's complaint to the Galactic Council has been classified as unprecedented in several. Council members have requested copies for what they termed entertainment purposes." Lieutenant Colonel Han So-young entered with an official message from Fleet Command. She was a career Marine who had fought in 3 real wars and she looked like she was having trouble processing their current situation. Fleet Command is requesting a full operational report. Apparently, the Galactic Council wants to officially recognize Earth's standard biological problem-solving as a legitimate military specialization. They're asking if we would be interested in establishing a permanent biological response division. Room fell silent as everyone absorbed this information. They had come to Zephyrian space as warriors responding to a distress call. They were apparently leaving as the galaxy's official pest control and environmental consulting service. Sir, Commander Parkthegin added quietly. Intelligence reports suggest that several major species have been observing our operations. They're impressed not just with our effectiveness, but with our restraint and precision. We could have sterilized entire planets, but instead we chose methods that protected innocent life while solving the problem. Admiral Tejo looked around. At his crew, good people who had signed up to defend humanity and had ended up becoming something entirely unexpected. They were still warriors, but they had also become healers, problem solvers, and apparently masters of the galaxy's most sophisticated revenge scheme. How long before the Kroner situation becomes unbearable for them, he asked. Dan's response was immediate. At current mosquito population growth rates, approximately 4 months before they formally request assistance. However, my behavioral models suggest they will offer an apology for the original biological attack within 6 weeks, and if they don't apologize, then they will learn to live with mildly annoying background music for the foreseeable future of their civilization. Admiral Tejo smiled as he watched another report come in from Kroner space. Apparently they're military officials. We're now holding strategy meetings, while constantly swatting at buzzing insects and trying to ignore the faint sound of twinkle. Twinkle, little star playing in modified alien frequencies. The galaxy had learned an important lesson about the people of Earth. They were not just dangerous when angry. They were creative, persistent, and perfectly capable of making their enemies' lives miserable in ways that were impossible to defend against and embarrassing to complain about. It was, he thought, probably the most human form of victory possible.